This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. This process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
You may get a little excited when you shop at Burlington.
What a low price! You see that? They have my favorite brand! It's like a whole new Burlington! I can buy two!
I'm saving so much!
Burlington saves you up to 60% off other retailers' prices every day. Will it be the low prices or the great brands? Burlington. Deals? Brands? Wow! I told you so. Styles and selections vary by store.
Quick heads up here at the top. There are a couple of curse words in this episode. And while I'm here, I should say we recorded this conversation Sunday night. And the story of what's happening on the ground in LA is a live one. There's always a chance things shifted overnight. Best I can tell, what's been happening in Los Angeles over the last few days started with a number, a quota, to be precise. Towards the end of May, President Trump's aide Stephen Miller came to immigration officials with a demand. He wanted them to triple the number of immigrants they arrested each day. This is according to reporting in Axios. Meeting his request, that would mean detaining 3,000 people every 24 hours. This is about when I started noticing the videos. There was one of a business owner in Western Massachusetts confronting ICE agents in tactical vests.
Okay, so, I have asked for IDs. Can you please tell me that you refuse to give us your IDs?
We don't need to give you IDs.
You don't need to give us IDs.
We do not need to give you IDs.
So how do we know you're federal? How do we know you're federal? So
you can call the locals.
Call the locals.
Then there was one showing angry crowds chanting, "Get the fuck out," during a raid in Minneapolis.
Get the fuck out! Get the fuck out! Get the fuck out! Get the fuck out! Get the fuck out!
And then there was Los Angeles. ICE got pushed back there when agents showed up at a local restaurant and a clothing store. Things got especially heated in a Home Depot parking lot.
What the hell is happening in Los Angeles right now?
Well, that's a really good question.
Liza Goitein was watching all this unfold, warily, from New York. She runs the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center.
I think what was disorienting for me watching it from afar was you would just get a snapshot of video where you would have very little context.
Yeah.
Seeing a silhouette in profile surrounded by tear gas doesn't actually say much about who started what or what happened. It just says that there's some kind of chaos, you know?
Right. And then I think the idea is then that leads a lot of people to say, well, then we must call in the military. But that's not really how it works.
What really got Liza's attention was the president's decision to use images of chaos as justification for a federal response. Saturday night, he announced he was going to deploy the National Guard in LA, whether the governor wanted him to or not.
You know, you see those images and you think, oh, of course, you know, something has to happen. Yes, something has to happen. You know, you should not have, violence in these protests. But it is state and local authorities that are supposed to address the situation, control the situation. And that is what they have been doing. And they have said, we don't need the military and we don't need our National Guard to be federalized against our will and deployed to effectively police this situation.
Well, the Trump administration seems to disagree. I mean, you could see online the way someone like J.D. Vance was basically saying things on Saturday like, we have foreign nationals with no legal right to be in this country waving foreign flags and assaulting law enforcement. The president will deploy the National Guard to quell these protests. When you might expect someone in that role to be urging calm.
So this is what's interesting. I mean, things had really quieted down pretty much until the National Guard was deployed. There was concern. There was concern that the deployment of National Guard would actually escalate, could actually escalate matters.
Do you share that concern?
Well, I'm just watching how it's playing out. And so far, it does not appear to have helped matters. And even though Los Angeles is, the ostensible hook here, if you read the president's memorandum, it doesn't mention Los Angeles. It authorizes the deployment of federalized National Guard and federal armed forces at any location anywhere in the country where there might be a protest against ICE activity, regardless of whether that protest, involves any violence, and in some cases where the protest hasn't even started yet, but the government just thinks it's likely to occur.
Does that mean civilians everywhere are at risk?
Yes, it does.
Today on the show, Trump sends in the troops. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little there, just hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill, too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
This episode is brought to you by Discover. It's smart to always have a few financial goals. And here's a really smart one you can set. Earning cash back on what you buy every day. With Discover, you can. Get this. Discover automatically matches all the cash back you've earned at the end of your first year. Seriously, all of it. Discover trusts you to make smart decisions. After all, you listen to this podcast. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. So how did Los Angeles end up in the president's crosshairs? The raids that happened on Friday prompted protests and a few tense standoffs. But the real showdown happened in Paramount, a city of 56,000 just to the south of Los Angeles proper. That's where a growing crowd of protesters became increasingly agitated on Saturday, according to the LA County Sheriff's Office. In the end, they were pushed back by law enforcement using tear gas and flashbangs. By midnight, many folks had dispersed. But that did not stop President Trump from signing a memorandum mobilizing 2,000 National Guard troops to go to Los Angeles and quell dissent. So I asked Liza to explain what legal authority the president was claiming for such a dramatic move.
It's important to start with a baseline, which is that federal armed forces, including the federalized National Guard, under ordinary circumstances, cannot be used to quell civil unrest under the Posse Comitatus Act. The Posse Comitatus Act generally bars federal armed forces, including the federalized National Guard, from directly participating in law enforcement activities, core law enforcement activities, which are things like arrests and searches and seizures, unless those activities have been expressly authorized by Congress or in the Constitution. The law, it was passed in 1878. It has a bit of an ignominious history because it was passed to essentially limit the use of troops to try to suppress white nationalist Ku Klux Klan groups during Reconstruction.
Not a great history there.
Yeah, but despite its ignominious origins, it does embody a longstanding tradition in Anglo-American law and political thought against military involvement in civilian government and, in particular, civilian law enforcement, unless there is an express statutory or constitutional authorization. And for quelling civil unrest or enforcing the law, the express statutory authorization that presidents have used since 1792 is the Insurrection Act. On its face, it gives the president very broad discretion to deploy federal troops to quell civil unrest or to enforce the law in a crisis. It was clearly intended as a very extraordinary measure that was only supposed to be used in extraordinary circumstances. But President Trump didn't invoke the Insurrection Act. He invoked 10 U.S.C. 12406, which is a law that uses some language that's pretty similar to what's in the Insurrection Act, but has been used by previous presidents as sort of a complement to the Insurrection Act. So they've been invoked together to essentially transfer command and control of the National Guard from the governor to the president so that the president can deploy them under the Insurrection Act. And what President Trump is attempting to do here is to uncouple them and to use 10 U.S.C. 12406 possibly on its own. It's a little confusing in the memorandum, but possibly to pair it with a claim of inherent constitutional authority to deploy troops to protect federal personnel, property, and functions.
My understanding is that the way the Guard has been called up actually is supposed to limit what they're able to do. Like, they shouldn't be able to act directly on or with civilians as law enforcement. They're just supposed to be able to support local officers. Is that correct? And if so, is it meaningful?
Well, I don't know how the Trump administration is interpreting these authorities and how the Trump administration plans to apply them.
So you're saying we're in uncharted territory?
Absolutely. I mean, we have waded into completely uncharted legal waters here in the way that Trump is using these authorities.
How unusual is it for the president to federalize the Guard over a governor's objections?
The president has not federalized the National Guard for the purpose of, quelling civil unrest or enforcing the law without a state request since 1965. So the last time was when President Lyndon B. Johnson federalized the Guard in order to protect civil rights marchers who were marching from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama.
It seems like the president is walking a very narrow path here. He's not invoking the Insurrection Act, but he's calling up National Guard, but he's not doing it with the blessing of Gavin Newsom, the governor of the state. It just seems like there are a lot of places this could go wrong.
Yes, the administration is going to very great lengths at this point to avoid invoking the Insurrection Act. Now, I don't necessarily expect that to continue. But for now, anyway, they are trying to rely on these other authorities. And we'll have to see how this plays out in terms of whether the administration is hoping to be able to do the very same things that it could do under the Insurrection Act, at least in theory.
Why would the administration go out of its way like that? What's the point?
It's difficult to speculate. I mean, it's, I can't say what's in the president's mind. I can say that the Insurrection Act is a very well-known authority at this point. It's had a lot of publicity, not particularly positive publicity over the last few years. It's very controversial. And if the president were to invoke it, it would certainly set off a political firestorm. Whereas 10 U.S.C. 12406, it's really not a law that almost anybody has heard of. It's very complicated to explain. It's confusing. Its use in the way it's being used now is untested. And so it kind of muddies the waters in terms of how people might respond to it. It's a concern. It's a concern because we don't know how the administration is interpreting these authorities. And we might not know until we see how things, play out with the soldiers who have been deployed.
Where's Governor Gavin Newsom in all this? Like, the National Guard seems to have been nationalized without his authority or blessing. What does that mean? And is there something he could be doing here, given that this is a military operation in his state?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing he can do to prevent the federalization of the National Guard. And once the Guard is federalized, Guard forces report to the president. They are under the president's command and control. They are no longer under the governor's command and control. So he has effectively lost control over those Guard forces who have been federalized.
I didn't know the president had that magic wand and he could just say, like, boop, they're mine.
Even though the governor can't prevent it from happening, certainly ahead of time, What the governor can do is bring a legal challenge if he believes that the president is using the National Guard in a way that is unlawful and in a way that is negatively impacting the state. I'm sure the governor is keeping a close eye on, what's actually happening right now on the ground.
On Sunday night, California's Governor Gavin Newsom formally asked President Trump to return National Guard command to California. And every Democratic state governor signed a statement declaring Trump's actions an abuse of power. We'll be right back after a quick break. This episode is brought to you by Discover. It's smart to always have a few financial goals. And here's a really smart one you can set: earning cash back on what you buy every day. With Discover, you can. Get this. Discover automatically matches all the cash back you've earned at the end of your first year. Seriously, all of it. Discover trusts you to make smart decisions. After all, you listen to this podcast. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
Comcast is committed to bringing access to the internet to all Americans, including rural communities across the country, like Sussex County, Delaware.
We were being left behind. Everybody around us seemed to have internet, but we did not. High-speed internet is one of those good things that we needed to help us move our farming, our small businesses, our recreation forward.
Learn more about how we're bringing our next-generation network to more people across the country at ComcastCorporation.com/investment in America.
The spirit of innovation is deeply ingrained in America, and Google is helping Americans innovate in ways both big and small. The Air Force Research Laboratory is partnering with Google Cloud using AI to accelerate defense research for air, space, and cyberspace forces. This is a new era of American innovation. Find out more at g.co/American innovation.
So it feels to me, and I know you've said this, that calling up the National Guard to operate inside the United States in this way is something Donald Trump has been almost itching to do. Like, he spoke about it on the campaign trail.
I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
I wonder if you began thinking about this possibility even back then.
Absolutely. I mean, President Trump name-dropped the Insurrection Act many times during his campaign. His affinity for the law goes back to 2020, when he reportedly was considering invoking the Insurrection Act in response to the protests over the police killing of George Floyd. It certainly seems like something that he was eager to do. And I, like many others, was expecting it and was preparing for it. This is a little bit of a wrench in the works. I think, one potential way to look at the deployment that's happening right now is as a kind of stepping stone.
A test.
A bit of a test, a bit of a sort of socializing the deployment of our, federal military, our federalized National Guard forces and inside American cities and towns.
I guess if I'm a member of the National Guard who's on the ground in Los Angeles, I might feel a little bit confused right now about what my role is, given everything you've said about how confusing it is, even the authority with which this is being done. Like, the New York Times is reporting that military officials are still trying to figure out the extent to which National Guard troops deployed in LA could engage with protesters. Who's going to be deciding this stuff?
Right. I mean, one really important question is, what are the rules for the use of force here? What are the rules of engagement? Because the rules of engagement that the military, the Federalized National Guard and Federal Armed Forces follow when they're deployed overseas, when they're deployed for one of their sort of actual core missions, are radically different from the rules that are supposed to apply for these kinds of civil disturbance operations.
Give me an example.
in terms of the use of force, right, the use of force in a civil disturbance operation should be a last resort. That is obviously not the case when the military deploys overseas as part of combat operations, right? So, I mean, that's the most basic sort of imaginable distinction. I mean, one of the reasons why the military doesn't usually do this job and why it isn't the military's job is because, the military is trained to fight and destroy an enemy. They're not trained. These soldiers are not, most of them are not trained to, peacefully enforce the law while de-escalating conflict and respecting constitutional rights.
You see the people you're dealing with as your enemy versus other citizens who maybe you need to get to calm down.
Yeah, other citizens who have constitutional rights. And who you are trying to protect at the same time you're trying to de-escalate any violence or any conflict. We don't know what rules the National Guard forces that have been deployed in California are operating under, and that is a really, really critical question here. And that question, by the way, is for me is raised by the news that is breaking right now that the National Guard has been not only using tear gas, but at least reportedly there have been pellet rounds deployed. This is unfolding, so it's hard to say exactly what's going on, but it is certainly for me kind of raising this red flag, or at least a yellow flag, about what are the rules of force that are governing these operations right now on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, as we're talking, the only way we're getting information is news reports, blue sky. People are saying, a peaceful situation has just turned bad, just like that. And people are running. And we don't know why, and we don't know what happened, but it doesn't seem like a positive outcome.
No, it really, really doesn't. It really doesn't. You have to ask the question, what would have happened if this were left in the hands of state and local law enforcement and there wasn't this sort of incendiary deployment of the military into the situation?
Yeah. I mean, I'm struck by the fact that the language from Washington, from the president, it's entirely based on escalation. Just this afternoon, the president was interviewed just briefly on the tarmac, and he talked about his idea that, protesters often spit at law enforcement. And, what I say is,
they spit, we hit. And I told them, nobody's going to spit on our police officers. Nobody's going to spit on our military.
That's sort of like when the looting starts, the shooting starts.
Yeah.
That is not the law. And it's not only not the law, it's deeply disturbing that is how our president and commander-in-chief looks at the appropriate role of a domestic deployment of the military.
I mean, I've noted Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has been suggesting, maybe we could send Marines to Los Angeles to help with protests. Could he even do that?
So this goes back to this claim of inherent constitutional power to deploy troops, including federal armed forces, to protect federal personnel, functions, and property. And so that is the stated objective in the memorandum.
So to protect federal property, not to deal with the protesters in a kind of law enforcement way.
Exactly. However, in a situation where there are clashes between protesters and ICE, for example, it is hard to see how these armed forces would be able to perform this stated function of protecting personnel and protecting the functions of ICE without engaging in some of these activities that are considered to be core law enforcement activities. And that's things like physical crowd control or brandishing weapons, stopping people, moving people from place to place. I mean, those kinds of coercive powers are exactly the powers that the Posse Comitatus Act prevents. It's hard to see how this legal justification doesn't very quickly start treading into the area of posse comitatus and raise a lot of those same concerns.
What would happen in that case? It's more legal battles, basically, more courtroom battles over whether what's happening can happen?
Well, it's courtroom battles, but, I don't want to say that it's entirely up to the courts here, because I do think that this administration keeps an eye on public opinion, and that public opinion actually does matter. And so I think if these deployments are seen for what they are, and if they are wildly unpopular, then that could influence what happens next. And I believe it could.
I'm glad you brought up public opinion, because I've been thinking a lot about that in this moment. Because, and this cuts a different way, it seems relevant to me that this calling out of the National Guard, federalizing of the National Guard, is happening at the same time that a lot of things seem to be going wrong for this administration. At the end of last week, we had this dramatic fallout between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. On Friday, it was announced that Kilmar Abrego Garcia, this migrant who had been mistakenly sent to El Salvador, he was returned to the U.S. Now, he's going to have to stand trial, but, the Secretary of Homeland Security had said there's no way he's ever coming back. So I don't think you can interpret that in any other way than the administration had to cave in some way because of public opinion. And it seems important to me that these things are happening at once, as the administration seems to be losing control, as the public opinion seems to be forcing it to do things. It's clamping down in this way with force. And so I see it as kind of a double-edged sword. And I wonder if you see it that way too.
Well, in general, the concerns about domestic deployment of the military are rooted in concerns about authoritarian power. And if you look at the way authoritarians have used the military in countries around the world, it is actually rarely in response to actual crises that are happening inside their borders, right? It is more often used to crack down on political dissent, or to sort of create some kind of political distraction, as you're saying. It tends to be used for political, to advance a political agenda or to suppress ideological dissent. I don't think that means that people should despair. It's an effort to sort of put people in a box a little bit, like you were saying. But I think it should be motivating, because the danger here is very clear, right? We cannot become a country where the president can deploy the military inside the country to police the activities of Americans effectively at will. That cannot happen.
Why not?
Because that really would be the death knell for individual liberties and for democracy. It is that important. And I think that should be motivating. This should be a moment for people who maybe weren't sure about where things were going, maybe weren't sure how they felt about some of the things the president was doing, to say, okay, this is a line that should not be crossed. And we are seeing the president taking a giant step to cross over that line.
Elizabeth Goitein, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks. It was my pleasure.
Liza Goitein is the Senior Director of the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, Ethan Oberman, and Madeline Ducharme. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Go track me down on Blue Sky. I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.